We're making a video about pirates. Why are we making a video about pirates, you ask yourself? Well, if you recall when I did the scooter cannonball ride from coast to coast on my Vespa, 8 days from Southern California all the way out to South Carolina, from San Clemente to Hilton Head, I got to listen to a lot of stuff on my headphones. I went through all of my playlists. I listened to a bunch of podcasts, but one particular podcast that really captured my imagination, and that's the podcast about pirates. I got to understand why pirates became pirates, and in a nutshell, it's out of poverty and desperation. But what do you do about a character, about a pirate that is not poor and that is not desperate? And we are talking about Stede Bonnet, the gentleman pirate. Stede Bonnet, the gentleman pirate, has come from a long line of wealthy plantation owners in Barbados, sugarcane plantations. His grandfather came to Barbados, set up the plantation. His father and his mom continued the plantation. Then it was up to him. Apparently he had 400 acres, 94 enslaved people, 3 personal enslaved folks just for himself. We also know that his father died when he was 6 years old and his mother died when she was 7, and the plantation was being looked after by friends of the family, as well as family as well. He was then taken care of by his aunt until he turned 18, and the plantation was handed over to him, where he was a gallivanting playboy running around Barbados, having the time of his life because he's that rich. He got married to Mary Allenby, who is the daughter of a plantation owner, and now you've got yourself a power couple of plantation owners marrying plantation owners, and he is so wealthy, and he is so bored with being so rich, and his wife was such an ag. According to the General History of Pirates by Captain Charles Johnson, his wife was such an ag, it drove him crazy. He had a disorder of the mind, is what they called it, and he said, to hell with this. I'm too tired of being rich with this nagging wife. I'm going to be a pirate. That's the narrative. That's what they say happened. That's what all the books say happened. I've got a different take on it. Here is my take. He didn't have 400 acres. You do some digging around, it's 138 acres. In the plantation world, not everybody gets rich. Only the very few get very, very wealthy, but the majority are very, very poor. And that's excerpts from a report that was sent to the House of Commons to talk about the state of the sugarcane plantation economy in Barbados. It's believed that Stede Bonnet was one of the very, very poor. He got married, yes indeed, and they had 4 kids, and one of them died at the age of 3. A lot of couples go through hell in their relationships, leading to divorce. Mary Lincoln never came out of her depression when her son died. It is a calamity for every family. So if they say he had a disorder of the mind, then no wonder he had a disorder of the mind. And if they say that he had troubles in his home life, then no wonder he had troubles in his home life. I don't believe he was as wealthy as they say he was, and I believe he resorted to a life of crime like the rest of the pirates, just so he could save his farm, literally, and save his family. So he went and got a loan out on a boat, because being a pirate, that's how you're going to make money, because he wasn't going to be a highwayman on a tiny island where everybody knows him. So he became a pirate. He took out a loan, he paid 10% on the boat. He actually was one of the first ones to give a salary to pirates, and he literally bet the farm to go out there to the high seas and do high robbery and come home hopefully wealthy without anybody knowing anything about him. And on April 18, 1717, his first act of criminality was leaving the port of Bridgetown at the time, where he's from and where he's born in 1688, under the cover of darkness, without having to tell the customs that he was taken off, just in case there was any trouble, or if he was to be caught, then they would not know it's him. He was really gone rogue. That's the story. All of this happened, the last 6 months of his life happened here, up and down the North Carolina coast. This is why we're doing a video about pirates. We're doing a video about Stede Bonnet up and down the Carolina coast. We're going to go to Bath, where he went to go get a letter of clemency from the governor at the time, Governor Charles Eden, the governor of North Carolina, where he met up with Blackbeard, where he was double-crossed, where he ended up meeting his fate on the gallows in Charleston. Sadly, never had the chance to go home and save the farm. But this video is about the video of Stede Bonnet So come with me on this piratical adventure, and away we ho ho ho! This is going to be a great video. Puffy's coming with me on my adventures. We pick up the story a year after Stede Bonnet decides to become a pirate. By this time, he's already met up with Blackbeard, and they've sailed around, and they've had some successes. Now, this is the last 6 months of Stede Bonnet's life and Blackbeard's life together. Now, what they had done was miraculous. They were sailing up and down the Carolina coast, all around the Caribbean, and back up the Carolina coast, only to hold the town of Charleston hostage. They blockaded that city. They had, by that time, a flotilla. They were this incredible force of this pirate armada, and they held the town of Charleston hostage. In fact, some prominent members of South Carolina society were held hostage. They were intercepted as they were trying to leave Charleston Harbor. Well, so what do they want? They wanted medication. They had sick pirates. Some of them were ill with the venereal disease, and they needed to have medication for their afflictions. And so they held the town hostage, and if they weren't going to deliver, then they were going to kill these hostages. And sure enough, 7 days later, they had their chest of medication. Then they were on their way, scarpering as fast as they could away from Charleston. Now they're on the run. After holding the town of Charlestown ransom for a week, Blackbeard and Stede Bonnet and the rest of his crew were done with Charlestown, and now they're hightailing it up the coast of Beaufort to figure out what their next steps are going to be. Well, the noose was tightening around them. Word was out that a lot of pirates had taken King George's first proclamation to suppress piracy's clemency letters once you turn yourself into a colonial governor. Well, they weren't going to turn themselves into Robert Johnson in South Carolina that they just ripped off Charlestown, and they weren't going to turn themselves into Alexander Spotswood up the coast of Virginia. He hated pirates. There's only one state in between, and that's North Carolina. And they had heard that Charles Eden, the governor of North Carolina, was willing to play ball. So they came down here to Topsail, 3 boats: the Adventure, the Revenge, and Queen Anne's Revenge, which was Blackbeard's flagship. So Blackbeard was the 3rd boat, the biggest one, sailing behind the 2, navigating their way through here, through Topsail Inlet, only for the big one, the one behind, to come to a crashing halt. The Adventure was sent over to help him, but it did more damage than good. Blackbeard knew what he was doing. He had 400 pirates on his payroll. He had to get rid of them. And he's really done a pretty good bit of pirating, but not enough for him to retire. But if he was to get his hands on a clemency letter, then he could retire with all the goods, and he did not want to share it with everybody else. So at that night, after the boat, after Queen Anne Revenge had sunk, they decided to send Stede Bonnet in a canoe up the coastline to Bath to talk to Charles Eden to get a stack of clemency letters. And while Stede Bonnet was making his way up to Bath, Blackbeard double-crossed him. Blackbeard double-crossed Stede Bonnet. As soon as Stede Bonnet was on his way to Bath, he piled everybody onto the Adventure and sailed up the coast and marooned a bunch of Stede Bonnet pirates on Boatbank Island. And we're going to go to Boatbank Island right now to see where they were marooned. Just imagine, right here, all of this happened. We had pirates sailing up and down this coastline. But first, we're on our way to Bath to see where Stede Bonnet met with Charles Eden. Hunting pirates, Puffy? I don't think that's the Queen Anne's Revenge. At the request of Blackbeard, Stede Bonnet was on his way to Bath in a canoe to meet with the governor of North Carolina, Charles Eden, about these letters of clemency. Well, while he was gone, there was some shenanigans going on behind his back. We're in Bath, North Carolina. What are we doing in Bath? thanks to King George I, who passed this law, this proclamation to suppress piracy. What it basically meant was a get-out-of-jail-free card for pirates. If you're willing to give up your wicked ways as a pirate and you get a letter from a colonial governor, you are no longer to be prosecuted or hanged for being a pirate, as long as you don't become a pirate again. Now, Stede Bonnet and Blackbeard had no chance of getting this letter from Virginia. No way. The governor of Virginia, Alexander Spotswood, hated pirates. His capes in Virginia were plagued by pirates, so much so that he looked into invading and annexing North Carolina because it was known to be a pirate haven. Some people think this was just a way to detract from the scandal that he was under. And the scandal was that he was lining his pockets with colonial coffers, with Virginia colonial coffers. And so this was a distraction, and no way were they ever going to get any mercy at all whatsoever from the governor of South Carolina, because it wasn't that long ago that Stede Bonnet and Blackbeard held the town of South Carolina hostage. They blockaded it for a week, stopping everything coming in and out, and also took hostages and sent them back a week later with just their underwear on. The shock and horror of the times. And so the only place where they could get this letter of clemency, this letter of mercy, was right here in Bath, North Carolina. That was the colonial capital of North Carolina, and Bath at the time was just barely over 100 people. There was hardly anybody here. And when you compare that up to Jamestown or to Charleston, it's a small town. Frankly, it still is a small town. It's nothing like Charleston, and it's nothing like anywhere in Virginia. Any which way, Stede Bonnet came on shore, met with the governor, met with Charles Eden, spent 3 days in the colonial mansion, which doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. I was hoping to go take a look-see. That's not around anymore. And he got his letter, and they say that he had a good time, which must have been refreshing since he spent 18 months on pirate ships talking to scumbags who can't read or write. He had a great time, got his letter, and got out of here. After a great meeting with the governor of North Carolina, Charles Eden, Stede Bonnet must have felt pretty good about himself. He was coming back with a stack of pardon letters for his crew, and he was ready to tell Blackbeard that it was safe for him to go and check it out himself. Well, wouldn't you know it, when he got to topsail, he was in for a rude awakening. Stede Bonnet had no idea what was going on. He made his way back to topsail, only to realize that his boat was empty. It was empty of crew, it was empty of all the plunder, it was empty of everything that he'd worked so hard for in the last month and a half, only to realize that Blackbeard had double-crossed him. He had taken the adventure with everybody in it and everything on it out here to Bogue's Bank to maroon Stede Bonnet's crew and to take off with the rest of the plunder. He was furious to find this out, so he went looking for his crew and went looking for Blackbeard, and he found his crew right here in Bogue's Bank, in Bogue Bank Island. Marooned, stranded, left to die. They hop on the ship looking for Blackbeard. They want to get their money back, and I gotta think that they also wanted to have it out with Blackbeard. It must be crazy to have it out with that guy. That guy is an experienced sailor, an experienced pirate, an experienced privateer, an experienced Royal Navy. He was not gonna lose to Stede Bonnet. He's sailing up and down the North Carolina coastline looking for Blackbeard and couldn't find him. Lucky for him, if you ask me, because I would not want to get into a confrontation with Blackbeard. By the time he was a little calmer, he decided to take his stack of clemency letters and to head back and to be on his way. Be on his way where? Cape Fear Basin, which is a fantastic hiding place for pirates because there's so many inlets and there's so many estuaries and there's so many places to hide, it's almost impossible to be found. So he took some time off there in Cape Fear Inlet by Southport, North Carolina to get his ship ready, and while he was at it, he was going to be pirating for some provisions for this long ride. So we're going to make our way down to Southport to see where he was camped out, careening his boat, fixing it, getting it ready for the long voyage to St. Thomas. And one of the guys that was here was David Harriet. and Ignatius Pell. And we'll find out more about them later. We're on our way to Southport, North Carolina to see where Stede Bonnet and his pirates were camped out, getting ready for their long voyage to St. Thomas. It wouldn't be an adventure without my dog Puffy, Max, but he goes by Puffy. And besides, he insisted he had to come along. And Puffy and I were off to go see where the gentleman pirate Stede Bonnet was apprehended. He was apprehended in Southport, North Carolina, and we were going there by catching the ferry. He was apprehended at the Battle of Cape Fear River, which is also known as the Battle of Sandbars, and it was fought in September 1718 between two sloops from the province of South Carolina, led by William Rhett, and William Rhett is one badass, and a group of pirate ships under the command of course, the gentleman pirate himself, Stede Bonnet. Rhett's sloops defeated the pirates in the Cape Fear River estuary, which led to the Bonnet's eventual execution by hanging in Charleston, South Carolina. So, to get to Southport, we're catching the Fort Fisher Southport ferry, and it is absolutely glorious. I highly recommend you take this ferry to Southport. Stede Bonnet, 1688 to 1718, Barbadian planter turned pirate. Made North Carolina his base in 1718, captured in naval battle a few miles from here, and hung in Charleston. This here truly is a point of history, of pirate history. The gentleman pirate himself, Stede Bonnet. Right, Puffy? Stede Bonnet? Let's go see where he was captured. Bonnet's Creek. Stede Bonnet, the gentleman pirate, used the mouth of this creek as a hideout for his vessel, the Royal James, formerly called Revenge. Here on September 26, 1718, the Great Battle of the Sandbars was fought between the pirates and the men sent to capture them under the command of Colonel William Rhett aboard the Henry and the Sea Nymph. After a 24-hour battle, there were 19 men killed, 23 wounded, and Bonnet, with the remains of his pirate crew, surrendered on November 8, 1718. 29 of the pirates were hanged in Charleston, South Carolina. A few weeks later, holding a cluster of flowers in his manacled hands, gentleman Stede Bonnet met the same fate on the gallows. We're at Bonnet's Creek in Southport, North Carolina. August 1718, right here, in this place right here, Stede Bonnet decided to camp out for a few weeks that turned into months in order for him to fix his boat. It's called careening, where they're scraping the barnacles, the plug-in holes, they're getting ready for a long voyage, and they're using the material from the other ships to patch things up. Now, he had just come from Bath, where he'd received a stack of clemency letters from the governor of North Carolina, Charles Eden. What's interesting, 50% of pirates that took that letter of clemency went back to piracy. Famous ones, such as Benjamin Hornigold, took a letter, but it did not go back to piracy. Jack Rackham, Calico Jack, took the letter but went back to piracy. Separate story altogether with Anne Bonny. Women, they'll drive you to become pirates again, as Calico Jack found out. All that. He's really free to go. He's free to go home. And whatever he has taken, it's his not to be prosecuted or hanged. But unfortunately, since Blackbeard double-crossed him, he's got nothing to go home with. So what does he go and do? He goes and changes his name from Stede Bonnet to Captain Thomas. What's he go and do? He goes and changes his ship's name from the Revenge to the Royal James. And, well, there is some thought that he was ready to go to St. Thomas. the island of St. Thomas, the Danish colony of St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands. Why St. Thomas? Well, he wasn't going there on a vacation. St. Thomas was a Danish colony, and there was word that Denmark was to go to war with Spain. So he had the idea of going to St. Thomas to get a letter of marque from the Danish government in order to become a privateer. I'll explain to you another time what a privateer is, but long story short, what they are is that they are mercenaries that are sponsored by countries. And it's their job to go out there and pirate ships, containers from other nations at war with the sponsoring nation. Now that privateer gets to keep most of the loot, but has to also give some back, a kickback to the sponsoring country. In this case, Denmark. Now, to sail all the way out to St. Thomas is going to take some time, and the boat's going to need to be fixed up, and their food is going to need to be served up, fresh water, rum, whatever it is. So how are you going to get that? Well, unfortunately, you have to go back to pirating to get what you need to become legit. So he went back to pirating. As soon as he left Bath, and as soon as he tried to find Blackbeard, who double-crossed him, they gave up the ghost on looking for Blackbeard, and they headed on the way to St. Thomas, but they stopped off here in Bonnet's Creek. That's what they were doing here. So in order for them to head off to St. Thomas, they had to pirate. They had to get some rations, they had to get provisions, they had to get fresh water, they had to get what it needed to take the long voyage out to St. Thomas. So as they're here, camped out, they were spotted. Well, he was spotted, and word gets down to South Carolina that there is a pirate ship here, and Charles Johnson wasn't having any of it. And so he employs the services of a local war hero by the name of William Rhett. And we're going to talk about William Rhett later on, and we're going to see his house there in Charleston. And William Rhett gets a posse, and they come out here to find out who this pirate is. William Rhett had two ships. He had the Henry that he was in, and there was a Sea Nymph, another one, which actually, interesting enough, belonged to Richard Tuckerman, and we'll talk about him later on in Charleston, and the kind of character that he is. Well, they come up here, and they run aground. It's low tide. So now the Henry and the Nymph with William Rhett have lost the element of surprise. Now the pirates hanging out here have got no idea what's going on, only for them to notice at the end there's two masts, like there are masts there in the horizon. So under the cover of darkness, they get into three canoes, and they go over there to find out that they weren't merchant ships. They thought they were merchant ships that they could continue to plunder. In fact, there were two heavily armed sloops with dozens of guns here to apprehend them. They get the word back to Stede Bonnet. Now, Stede Bonnet decides, instead of hightailing it the other way, away from those two ships, he decides that when the tide comes back up, he's gonna charge at them. So they get ready all night for a charge. And sure enough, the water goes up from both of them, and they're all coming towards each other, and they get to this tight estuary. A really tight estuary, and they come aground again at a sandbar. Well, in fact, it's called the Battle of the Sandbars. Here's what happened here. And because of the way these ships were stuck, the Sea Nymph is all the way out. It's not even making its way into the estuary. And William Rhett's boat, called the Henry, is now stuck at such an angle where the deck is now almost facing up. They're totally exposed. And the Royal James, that was previously the Revenge, under the captaincy of Captain Thomas, that is Stede Bonnet, is now facing them, looking right down at them, and they let them have it. Hellfire ensues for 6 hours between the two. The Henry's crew are hiding, and these guys are just hammering away. Until 6 hours later, the tide goes up, and wouldn't you have it, Stede Bonnet's luck, the Henry is the first one to right ship, and they make a run for the Royal James. The Royal James is still stuck. lots of theories as to what happened in that time. A dear friend of Stede Bonnet got killed. Stede Bonnet decided to blow the whole ship up and blowing everybody with him. But before any of that happened, they raised the white flag and they gave up to William Rhett, and they brought them in 3 days later into South Carolina, where we'll see that Stede Bonnet was imprisoned, and he escaped, and he was caught again by none other than William Rhett. And then brought back to trial, and then he was hanged. But this is where all of that happened, right here at Bonnet's Creek. Truly a historic place to be in pirate lore. Incredible. And what's cool is that the North Carolina Maritime Museum at Southport, there are some artifacts at this museum from this very same battle. Check this out. You get to see little cannonballs and belt buckles, all from that. That's amazing. Well, that's enough Southport for the day. Puffy and I are getting back on the ferry and heading over to Charleston, where we're going to see where Stede Bonnet was imprisoned, where he escaped out of prison, only to be captured on Sullivan's Island by none other than William Rhett himself, only to be brought back to Charleston again and hanged. So that's what we got ahead of us, Puffy and I, on this exciting adventure, following in the footsteps of Stede Bonnet, the gentleman pirate. Puffy, we're on the hunt for pirates. We're looking for Stede Bonnet. Are you sniffing around? Let's go, boy. We're making our way to the Old Exchange in Charleston, on Broad Street and East Bay, where Stede Bonnet's men were imprisoned. On October 3rd, 1718, Colonel William Rhett's small fleet returned to Charlestown and were received to the great joy of the whole province of Carolina. The captured pirates were separated upon being brought here ashore 2 days later and delivered into the custody of Nathaniel Partridge, who served as both the Provost Marshal of South Carolina and the Marshal of the Provincial Court of Vice Admiralty. That's a mouthful. And at the time of the taking of the crew of the Royal James, Charlestown did not have a public prison. And so the crew of the Royal James, therefore, except for Bonnet, was detained at the Charlestown Watch House, a one-story brick building at the intersection of East Bay and Broad Street, right here. With more than 30 prisoners packed into a single-story building, the conditions of confinement must have been atrocious. The Old Exchange and Provost Dungeon, right here behind me, or the Charleston Custom House, was completed in 1771 and still sits here, right here, at the location of the original watch house. And this is the building right here behind me. On this location, this actually happened. What's interesting is Stede Bonnet wasn't crammed into this tiny dungeon with 30 other pirates. No. He had his own personal prison. I'm standing at the corner of Crowden Church, where it is believed that the gentleman pirate Stede Bonnet was imprisoned here at the house of Nathaniel Partridge. While 30 of the other pirates were imprisoned over there in the Charleston Watch House, Stede Bonnet had this place all to himself, only to be joined a few days later by a couple of the other pirates, his compatriots, Ignatius Pell and David Harriet. Well, wouldn't you know it? A couple of weeks later, he mysteriously broke out of here, dressed as a woman with his friend David Harriet, and they took off to Sullivan's Island. Now, David Harriet and Ignatius Pell came here from over there, from the other pirates, is because they agreed to give evidence against the pirates. But all that to say, they didn't last that long, because with the help of a local merchant by the name of Tuckerman, David Harriet and Stede Bonnet broke out of here in the middle of the night, dressed as women, to make their way over to Sullivan's Island. Well, we're going to head off to Sullivan's Island, and I'm going to show you exactly where he was and where he was captured. This is the house where the man that caused Stede Bonnet lived, right here, 54 Hassel Street. William Rhett was no joke. In 1706, he led a small fleet of local ships that repulsed the French and Spanish invasion of the city of Charleston. I mean, this guy was a badass, but he's probably best remembered for the capture of the gentleman pirate Stede Bonnet there in 1718 in the Battle of Cape Fear River. William Rhett, badass extraordinaire. I have to remind myself, when Stede Bonnet and David Harriet broke out of jail, they didn't have bridges and roads. They had marshes. They didn't know where they were going. But thanks to the aid of two people, they had an enslaved person and a local native guide to get them to Sullivan's Island, where there was supposed to be a boat waiting for them to sail them off to safety. So Stede Bonnet managed to escape after 3 weeks of being in jail. Him and his buddy David Harriet, he was on a boat with him, who was also caught as well. They managed to break out of jail, dressed as women. Now, of course, they got to have had some local help. It was suspected that a local merchant by the name of Richard Tuckerman helped him to bust out of jail. He gave him a native guide and an enslaved fella as well to get him on a boat and get him out of here. And they were here for 2 weeks. Now, in the meantime, when the governor found out, he threw a fit and put a 700-pound bounty on Stede Bonnet's head. And he got a posse together to go get this guy. And guess who was leading the posse? None other than, of course, the man that caught him the first time around, William Rhett. So a gunfight ensues. They get cornered. David Harriet dies in the gunfight, and they take him in again. And this time, Governor Johnson was not putting up with no nonsense anymore. This guy had to go, and had to go quickly, no matter what anyone said. Puffy? Puffy the pirate hunter? I think we're getting close to this monument. This is the monument. Oh, fabulous. We found it. Near the spot in the autumn of 1718, Stede Bonnet, notorious gentleman pirate, and 29 of his men captured by Colonel William Rhett met the just deserts after a trial and charge, famous American history, by Chief Justice Nicholas Trott. Later, 19 of Richard Worley's crew, captured by Governor Robert Johnson, were also found guilty and hanged. All were buried off the White Point Gardens in the marsh beyond low water mark. Check this out. It was at this spot that Stede Bonnet met his untimely death at the end of a hangman's noose. Him and 29 of his other men were hanged right here. Justice Trott gave him shit, telling him that he wasn't a proper Christian. There was just nonsense going on in this city. Women were going bonkers. They loved him. Men were going crazy. They set buildings on fire. He was begging for mercy, asking for clemency. He even wrote to Governor Johnson that he was going to chop his arms and legs off just so not to be a pirate. I promise you, I am not going out there again. Still, that wasn't enough. At the end of the day, this is it. Right here is where he met his end. The gentleman pirate.
Well, he's buried under the gazebo. But
Under the gazebo?
under the gazebo.
No way.
Not a lot of people know that. But yeah, he's actually under that gazebo.
Thank you.
I love your dog. Bye.
Sherry's baby daddy didn't pay much attention to the dame of the time. Never remember the day they met.
Well, here in White Point Garden, under the gazebo, is apparently where the Major Stede Bonnet, gentleman pirate, is buried. And that brings to the end our story of gentleman pirate Stede Bonnet, fittingly really, because apparently this is where he's buried. This is his end. Just before we go, we've got a couple of questions. Mr. Bonnet, Major Stede Bonnet, we've got a couple of questions. What the hell were you thinking? What were you thinking?